This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, the editor-in-chief at FanDuel and at NumberFire.com, and this is episode 171 of the Late Round Podcast, one of the many shows that are part of the NumberFire Podcast Network. Thanks for tuning in. I won't waste your time at the start of today's show because I know that your time is valuable, and this podcast is usually the longest one of the week. And you know how I like to roll with the Late Round Podcast. Short, sweet, and information-packed. We don't need any filler. Before I get to the transactions this week, though, I just wanted to send a reminder that you guys should be playing FanDuel's free Gridiron Pick'em game. Just choose the winning teams for all of Sunday's games with no spreads and compete for a chance to win $10,000 split amongst all the top pickers. $10,000 is up for grabs for free every week, so be sure to head over to FanDuel.com and check it out. Sell Alex Collins. Alex Collins has documented fumbling issues. He had issues holding onto the ball in college, and now that's translated to the NFL. He had problems last season, and then this year, he's already fumbled twice. And Sunday night's fumble at the goal line against Pittsburgh was a really big one because it spread some fear that he just won't see many goal line touches moving forward. Before fumbling the ball against the Steelers, Alex Collins had been out-carrying Buck Allen 5-0, and he had the only target between the two players. After that fumble, and remember, the Ravens were in a positive game script for much of the game, Allen out-attempted Collins 9-6 after the fumble, and he saw 2 targets to Alex Collins 0. So the Ravens weren't using Alex Collins as much after he fumbled the football. And so far this season, the Ravens have run 12 goal line plays, with 8 of those plays being rushes. Buck Allen has 4 of those rushes, while Alex Collins has 3. After Sunday night, there's very little reason to assume that Alex Collins is going to be the full-time goal line rusher for this Baltimore Ravens offense. Now, a lot of people have noted that Collins doesn't need goal line work to be viable in fantasy football. I don't fully disagree there, but we have to think about sustainability. Collins is not the team's primary pass-catching back. Buck Allen is. Buck Allen has 19 targets this year, and Alex Collins has 10. And there's a good chance that he won't be grabbing hold of goal line duties now. So that means that the 2 most important aspects for running backs in fantasy football, seeing volume through the air and scoring touchdowns, aren't siding with Alex Collins. I just want more upside with my running backs. So if you can flip him for a more stable asset, maybe like a wide receiver, I don't think it's a bad idea right now. Hold Kenyon Drake. So some of you guys were wondering what I would do with Kenyon Drake, and the answer is I would hold him. I don't think you can sell him right now, but I certainly would not be buying him. This is not a buy low moment for Kenyon Drake. Going into week 4, the biggest hope for Kenyon Drake owners was to see him on the field in a negative game flow situation. Because up until that point, through the first 3 weeks of the season, Kenyon Drake had seen 12 targets, but that equated to a 16% target share. The Dolphins just hadn't run many plays, so the target share was really high. And with that type of target share, if the team started to throw more passes, then Kenyon Drake would see a lot of targets. But not in Adam Gase's world. On Sunday, Kenyon Drake was outsnapped by Frank Gore in a game that got away from Miami early. He finished the day with just 3 carries and 2 targets. If there's one thing that you want to be optimistic about, it could be that Miami was just saving Kenyon Drake. It was a blowout of a game, so they didn't want to throw Kenyon Drake onto the field. And Frank Gore did dominate end-of-game touches, carrying the ball 6 times when Brock Osweiler was under center. Because Brock Osweiler was playing in that game because Ryan Tannehill was so bad. But that still doesn't do us much good in predicting when Kenyon Drake can be usable in fantasy football. That's part of the problem. It's a bad offense. You don't want your running backs to be part of bad offenses. Right now, the Dolphins rank 4th worst in yards per drive and dead last in plays per drive. So like I said, you can't sell Kenyon Drake right now because no one wants Kenyon Drake. But I certainly would not be buying him either. Add Kiki Cutie. So Kiki Cutie made his NFL debut on Sunday, and he had an amazing outing. He led the Texans with 11 catches, and he had over 100 yards receiving. His 15 targets accounted for almost 36% of Deshaun Watson's passes. That's a great target share. And in Houston, you have Bruce Ellington on IR, and Will Fuller is now dealing with a hamstring injury. So Cutie could and should continue to see work in this Houston Texans offense. I think he's a really good waiver add this week. Buy Corey Davis. The Tennessee Titans offense had been really bad through the first 3 weeks of the season, really for everyone. But that changed against Philadelphia. The game went into overtime, so we did see more plays, and with more plays, you get more volume for your fantasy football assets. Marcus Mariota threw it 43 times, and not one person benefited more from all those passes than Corey Davis. He had 9 catches for 161 yards and a game-winning touchdown. Now, the problem for Corey Davis in 2018 up until this point had been quarterback play to go along with a run-heavy offense. He's seen Blaine Gabbert and a banged-up Marcus Mariota at quarterback, and then the Titans had the lowest pass-to-rush attempt ratio in the NFL, both in general and in neutral game script situations through the first 3 weeks of the season. So that combination meant that Corey Davis's 30% target share really didn't matter that much. If you're a run-first team with bad quarterback play, I don't care what your target share is. But now we look at things a little bit differently. Now, after week 4, Corey Davis ranks in the top 15 in air yards compiled. He's averaging 1.5 red zone targets per game, and he's got a 31.5% target share. Those numbers are sincerely elite. Now, if Tennessee's passing attack continues to be handcuffed by bad quarterback play, then Corey Davis will probably act more as a higher-end wide receiver 3 from here on out. And they've also got a few tough matchups and then a bye week upcoming. But if Marcus Mariota is healthy and he looks more like the 2016 version than the 2017 version, Corey Davis has a crazy, crazy high ceiling this year. Sell Calvin Ridley. Calvin Ridley now has 6 touchdowns this year, and they've all come over the last 3 games. Now, if you're a Julio Jones owner, you might want to skip over this part. Julio Jones has scored 6 times over his last 29 games. But back to Calvin Ridley. He's scoring a touchdown on every 3.5 targets this year. But the NFL average for a wide receiver since 2011 has been a touchdown scored on every 21.6 targets. But you guys already know this. You know that Calvin Ridley is going to regress. What you might not realize is that Calvin Ridley's been doing this on limited snaps. Over the last 3 weeks, Julio Jones has played 156 snaps, and Mohamed Sanu, their teammate, has been on the field for 162. Calvin Ridley's played 115 snaps. And then according to Pro Football Focus, Calvin Ridley's run 78 routes during this time over the last 3 games, which is 19 fewer than Mohamed Sanu and 22 fewer than Julio Jones. In a high-powered offense like Atlanta is, they're scoring lots of points. Calvin Ridley's peripheral numbers would typically yield maybe wide receiver 3 type numbers. But instead, he's been a plug-and-play option in fantasy football over the last 3 weeks. And even though the Falcons get a plus matchup against Pittsburgh this week, and even though Atlanta would be wise to play Calvin Ridley more as the season goes on, this is still an opportunity to at least see what you can get for a player who's not going to maintain his current pace. Add Ronald Jones. You guys know that I'm not much of a Ronald Jones believer. There were receiving-related red flags attached to Jones coming out of school, and that continued this summer. He was struggling in pass protection and as a pass catcher. So why should you add him right now? Well, really, it's just a high upside stash. That's what Ronald Jones is right now. The Buccaneers have been an absolute disaster on the ground to start the year, so they finally activated Ronald Jones this week after not playing him all season long. He did lead the Tampa Bay backfield in touches with 10, but he still played 11 fewer snaps than teammate Peyton Barber. Really, the hope is that as the season moves forward, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers decide to utilize their second-round back more and more. And while I'm not a huge believer in his talent, I'm not right about everyone. I get things wrong all the time. And regardless, a first-year running back who's seeing touches is at least worth a roster spot. Sell James White. So James White has probably been the only bright spot for the Patriots all season long. He's currently a top 10 running back in fantasy football. And without Rex Burkhead in week 4, James White played over 49% of New England snaps, and he scored twice while seeing 10 targets and 8 carries. And that all came in a game where New England played with the lead. You typically don't see that from James White in a positive game script. But there are 2 main reasons to be a little bit hesitant with James White moving forward. I think the first one might be a little bit obvious. Julian Edelman is returning in week 5. White currently has a 22.2% target share in the Patriots offense. That's bound to go down a little bit with Julian Edelman entering the picture. But to be honest, there was going to be some type of regression with that type of target share at the running back position. We don't see that very often. But the second reason to sell White is because he's not the goal line back for New England. Sony Michel handled the goal line work in Sunday's contest against Miami. That's going to limit James White's upside. I don't think that James White won't be usable from here on out. Don't get me wrong. I think he's a great piece, especially if you're looking for a nice floor in PPR formats week to week. But it would be really surprising. I think it would actually be shocking if James White finishes the season as an RB1 given Edelman's return and Michel's use at the goal line. Buy or hold Jordan Howard. This is the riskiest transaction on this week's list. There's no doubt about it. Because you saw it and I saw it on Sunday. Tariq Cohen not only saw a big jump in workload during week 4, but he looked really good with the ball in his hands as well. He ended up carrying the ball 2 more times than Jordan Howard, and he also out-targeted him 8-1. And would you look at that, the Bears scored 48 points. And that's the fear. The fear is that since the Bears perform so well, things won't change offensively. They're going to keep using Tariq Cohen because that seemed to be their spark. But I do think it's important to note that Jordan Howard still played more snaps than Tariq Cohen in Sunday's contest, and he also saw the only goal line look for the Bears. And Chicago's not likely to have that type of passing touchdown to rushing touchdown split ever again. That's going to favor Jordan Howard in future games. And I do think the matchup had something to do with this as well. Let's not forget that the Buccaneers are a team that struggled a lot to stop the pass this season. And that led to a more pass-friendly game plan for Chicago. Chicago was up big at the half, and they still came out firing at the start of the second half. And that means that Tariq Cohen was just naturally more involved. I mean, this was rational coaching. This made a lot of sense. But Howard went into week 4 ranked 7th in rushing share and 20th in target share at the running back position. One game against the funnel defense should not drastically change how we view Jordan Howard. He's still the goal line back, and he still played more snaps than Tariq Cohen on Sunday. So at the very least, I don't think it's a bad idea to just go talk to the Jordan Howard owner and see how they're feeling about Howard. I still think he's an RB2 this season. Add Nyheim Hines. It's another 15 transactions week, and it's another add Nyheim Hines recommendation. Hines has now been targeted 26 times this year, which is good for about a 14% target share in that Colts offense. That's a pretty good number for a running back. His snap share over the last 2 weeks without Marlon Mack, who's been battling a hamstring injury, has been 72.9% and 68.9%. Those are also strong numbers. Part of this has been due to the fact that the Colts have been in negative game scripts. Nyheim Hines is a pass-catching running back, so when you're throwing the ball and you're in a negative game script, he's going to be on the field. But the Colts are also not very good. They've got plenty of holes. They're going to be in negative game scripts this season. And at the very least, Nyheim Hines makes for a pretty good running back fill-in here in week 5. The Colts are playing the Patriots on Thursday night, so they're going to have a short week for rest. And that will also decrease the likelihood that Marlon Mack will come back from his injury and play. And New England's a 10-point favorite, so there should be a negative game script. That all benefits Nyheim Hines. Add Jameis Winston. So the Buccaneers have a bye in week 5, and I'm usually not an advocate for holding on to replaceable assets through bye weeks in fantasy football. But I do feel like I have to mention Jameis Winston, who's going to be the starter for Tampa Bay once this bye week is over. Because once this bye week is done, Tampa Bay gets Atlanta on the road and then Cleveland at home. Those are 2+ matchups for Jameis Winston. And the Buccaneers' weapons are some of the best in football for a starting quarterback. I think any plus matchup should allow Jameis Winston to thrive in fantasy football as a result of that. So if you have a deep bench, you can stash him for weeks 6 and 7. Buy Jarvis Landry. So Landry didn't have a big day in week 4, but he just missed a touchdown early on in the game, and he still saw 10 of a possible 41 Baker Mayfield targets. And now Landry's target share is one of the best in the league at 31.8%. And that high target share combined with one of the best air yard profiles in football, that makes him an elite option for the rest of the season. And that's especially true as Baker Mayfield gets more and more comfortable as Cleveland's starter. Add Taylor Gabriel. So even before week 4, Taylor Gabriel had a lot of things going for him. That's why I mentioned him on my matchups podcast last week. He's only owned in 6% of Yahoo leagues though, but he's seen over 22% of Chicago's targets this season. That's an incredible target share for someone who's owned in so few leagues. So quite simply, that's enough. That target share is enough to warrant an add off the waiver wire this week. Buy Vance McDonald. Vance McDonald has mostly been splitting time with Jesse James from a snap share standpoint since he returned to Pittsburgh's lineup in week 2. On Sunday night, though, he played 61.9% of the Steelers' snaps, which is the largest share seen by one of the 2 tight ends since McDonald's been active. But what's most important is that Vance McDonald ran 32 routes compared to Jesse James' 11 against Baltimore. The route run numbers were much closer in weeks 2 and 3. So it's very clear that McDonald is now Pittsburgh's primary pass-catching tight end, as he should be. He's now seen 174 receiving yards over the last 2 weeks. Vance McDonald has been really good as a receiver. And in an offense that's being forced to throw a lot, and at a position that's a complete dumpster fire that is the tight end position, Vance McDonald could legitimately finish as a lower-end tight end 1 this season. Add Blake Bortles. So week 5 doesn't have a whole lot of obvious quarterback streamers. Week 4 was awesome for them. Week 5, not so much. But Blake Bortles is definitely one who jumps out because he's going to be facing a porous Kansas City secondary on the road. The game has a strong over-under that's higher than 50, and Bortles has now provided QB1 numbers in 2 of his 4 games this year. Jacksonville just won't be able to play conservatively against the Chiefs, So Bortles should have an opportunity this week to provide fantasy points. He's always a risky play, but this is definitely the right matchup for him to thrive, as it has been for many quarterbacks this season. Add the Tennessee Titans defense. The Titans have been fine defensively so far this year, but this week's matchup is really what matters. They're going to be on the road, but they're going to be facing the Bills and Josh Allen. Allen's now thrown multiple picks in 2 of his 3 starts, and he's been sacked a total of 15 times across 3 games. With a game total that's under 40 points, Tennessee has a nice floor and ceiling this week as a defensive streamer. This week's 16th transaction that you can't get in my 15 transactions column over at numberfire.com is to add Cameron Brate. It sounds like OJ Howard is going to miss a little bit of time with a sprained MCL, so Cameron Brate should see a little bump in opportunity. Howard and Brate have run almost the same number of routes this year, and they've dug into each other's workloads as a result. They actually rank about 30th in routes run at the tight end position this season. But without Howard in the mix, that role should be all Cameron Brate's. Meaning we could realistically see Cameron Brate jump up to having a routes run number that's in the top 10 or so. Now again, I should reiterate, Tampa Bay has a bye this week, but that's not a bad thing. If you have the roster spot to hold on to Cameron Brate through the bye, that means that fewer teams will be going after him this week, making him an easier grab off the waiver wire. That's it for this week's 15 Transactions show. Thanks to everyone for listening. If you've yet to subscribe to the Late Round Podcast, please do so by searching for it on iTunes, Google Play, SoundCloud, TuneIn, and Stitcher. And if you could leave me a rating and review on iTunes, it would be greatly, greatly appreciated. And make sure you're following me on Twitter at LateRoundQB. That's where you can ask questions for this week's mailbag show, which drops every Friday. Thanks, everyone. I'll talk to you later in the week.